Hey everyone, I am going to be talking about Gitflow today, which is just, it's sort of a accepted best practice for working with Git amongst developers. It's nothing special, doesn't require any special tools. I've been using it for the better part of a decade, and it's served me well in pretty much every use case that I've put it in. So I'll start with, let's talk about what is like a fairly common starting Git workflow. Can we see my fancy Google slide here?
Yes.
Cool. So this probably looks fairly familiar to most of you. You have your main or master branch, and then you'll take a branch off of that, make some commits to it, and merge it back in, or make a PR to merge it back in. And one of the great things about Git is that you can have multiple branches simultaneously, and you can merge them back in basically whenever it's convenient for you, which is great. This is a functional workflow right up until it isn't. So let's take a look at one of the situations that's really actually quite fairly common, especially for us here at 2 Degrees, where that might be the case. What happens if these two branches are interacting with each other in some way? So this branch implements a function, and this branch uses it, or vice versa. So really, one branch doesn't make a whole lot of sense without the other, right? So what you get there is, in between here, that there's that period of time where one of the branches has been merged in, but the other one hasn't yet, where the thing doesn't work anymore. And that I feel should be a fairly standard thing that we should hold ourselves to, is that our system should not be broken at any point, right? Like, that shouldn't be the default state at any point in time. So the useful way to get around that is to instead call this thing development or dev or develop, something along those lines, and you have another branch up here. I'm going real high tech here. And that is your main branch. And so then you can, once these two things are together, you can make a merge back from the development branch into the main branch. And so the main branch only has a few commits on it, but at each commit, you know that the system works. And that is a really important thing, is because it means that this main branch isn't going to have all of the latest, coolest, newest things at any given point in time, but it works. And that is a really, once you have that change in mindset, that you can make more changes, and maybe they'll work, maybe they won't, but I don't have to worry about breaking the thing that everyone else is using. That really frees you up to be a bit more ambitious in in the types of changes that you can make. Questions so far on the motivation for why this system exists? CJ.
So I think it's interesting, hypothetically, and totally happy to do this for us. But I also, isn't like the CI testing and stuff that hopefully you have, doesn't that like avoid these problems? I mean, if the main reasoning or justification for this is we don't want to break main or master or whatever you want to call it, isn't that the whole purpose of having the CI testing? I mean, I would think that you should have CI tests that will test whatever change you're making in your branch. Does it work on that main branch without messing anything up? And if it does, then like you're okay to merge. So like, what additional benefit beyond that are you getting?
That assumes you have perfect 100% CI testing, which is not a realistic thing for anyone to assume, right? Second, it also assumes that none of the branches have interdependencies or ordered dependencies, right? How many times have you been in a situation where this branch can't be merged in until PR 228 has been merged, right? Something along those lines. When you're using this sort of system, you can merge whatever branch you need to when it's done. And then the other branch can get merged in when that one's done. You don't have to worry about those ordering dependencies so much.
So does that imply that you're totally willing, and it's probably even likely that you will break the develop branch frequently?
Develop is a branch that should work most of the time, but is not guaranteed to. Main must work.
Yeah.
And so the way you can mediate that to make sure that even if develop isn't perfect, that main does work, is by let me add one more branch here. So let's add in this branch here. I'll color it a little different. It's going to be red. And this one is called release. And this one is another one of these short-lived branches that, so main will always exist, develop will always exist, but every other branch can be deleted when it's done. And so on the release branch, you can build your code, make sure that it actually works, if you need to make any changes to it. So a really common thing to see on the release branch is like updating the README or updating the notes files or bumping version numbers, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then once you're happy that the release branch is done, then that gets merged in. Ooh. Like that. And that gets merged in, and then it would also get merged back into develop, so that any of the changes you made on the release branch also are included in what everyone else is working on. So you don't have to have that perfect CI testing because you can do your testing on this.
Awesome.
That assumes that your testing that you do on your release branch is 100% effective. Unlike your testing on your CI, but okay. So
I mean, but so the reason to do this is because it is a lot more practical to do if you have, I don't know, let's say a 4-hour build process and then several hours of manual testing prior to a release, right?
Yeah, fair.
That sounds fairly familiar. It is a lot easier to have that happen once in a while off of a release branch, and then you can say, if something is failed, you can be like, okay, is this something that is a quick fix and we can put it on the release branch, or do we kick it back to develop and then start over again?
Can I keep asking questions?
Yeah.
Go for it. I'm just gonna. I can't really see people here, so people just have to speak up.
So the names that you give branches like foobar, etc. These are basically arbitrary. They can be anything you want.
Yeah.
And so then I wonder why, in this case, why does main have to be this like untouchable branch? Why not make like release this untouchable branch only blah blah blah, and then main could be your develop branch where you like push stuff. And part of the reason I ask this is because at least in the R package development world, the expectation is that whatever is your main or master on your default, let's call it your default branch on GitHub, that's what like would get installed if you use install GitHub and you don't do anything special. So that's always considered as sort of like the developer, like ready for release for testing, but not what's released type version. So
you're on a bad assumption there. If I'm installing a package from GitHub, I want it to work, not I expect that I'm going to be doing development on it.
No, yeah, but I'm saying the standard in our package world is that what is on GitHub on your default branch, so what you would get by default if you use install GitHub, is a development version, which is expected to work, but also understood there might be bugs in it because it hasn't been like fully packaged and released on CRAN. So if we were doing this type of workflow, what would be ideal is if we left the main branch as sort of the develop branch, and then you had this additional release branch that was a sort of untouchable, like the only put stuff there when it's ready to be released on CRAN branch. Is that possible as well?
I mean, you can see here I renamed the branches and the workflow is the same.
Yeah.
So that the name of the branch, so it is customary to have it be develop main, and then all of these other branches get prefixed with like a feature prefix.
There, I would like to, to extend the comment by Gabor. Actually, in a conversation we had, I asked about release models and how untouchable is the master branch on GitHub repo, and his answer was that for them, the released is the product on CRAN. So just like Alex is describing here, except that the names of the branches could kind of change, right? So if there is no CRAN, because the software that you maintain is not put on CRAN, then what would be on CRAN could, in my interpretation, right, Alex, this is for you to kind of check that I'm understanding correctly, but CRAN would be what in the original graph you showed as main, right? Is that correct? And then the main branch of a GitHub repository, based on Gabor's interpretation of his workflow, could be what we are calling here development, I think, originally.
Yeah, I'm just going to, for right now, I'll use the standard convention with this model. For our implementation, we can change the names, but I think our default assumption should be if someone is going to be installing something from GitHub, that they're going to expect the thing that they are installing to work and not be it's not supposed to does it work or does it not should not be a matter of which day did I install it on, right? I think if someone really wants the hottest, latest features, they can step out and add that one extra argument to install from the whatever the development branch is.
Yeah, cool. And I guess that the I mean, what's implicit here in the well, I don't know if it's implicit. I mean, the importance here is that, as you said, Alex, it frees the developers to work super conservatively, right? So you can be more experimental. And I think that's why I contacted at that point. I made that question before that Gabor responded, because he said that he doesn't sometimes ask for reviews on things that he merges on his GitHub thing, because in their team the release is crunched. So they can sometimes do quick things without huge reviews, and then they do a bigger review when they submit to crunch. So for us, if we just move everything back to ourselves, so if the release is something that we maintain on the GitHub main branch, then yeah, so that workflow there makes total sense. So now we have a develop branch where we are working fast without being too conservative, still aiming right for, I guess, for checks to pass and everything, but it's not the end of the world if something doesn't. And then whenever we do the release, we have more checks, and then it's merged to main. Is that my interpretation correct, Alex?
Yeah, so I think that really touches on a institutional benefit of this sort of model is, if I'm writing a feature and I'm writing some code and I merge it into develop, it's not a problem for me to tag one of you and be like, hey, can you take a look at this? It should work. You take a look at it. It looks reasonable to you. Cool. We throw it into develop. Things are perfectly content, right? But it's also entirely reasonable that before we change our main or our production, whatever we end up calling it, but before we change this branch, that we want more people to look at it and be like, okay, we are making some changes to the interactive reports, right? Those are included in this release branch, is some changes there. Persons X, Y, and Z, can you all three of you sign off, make sure that these changes look good to you, right? This model adds that little bit of formality that allows us to say, okay, anytime we try to merge into the main branch, one of the project managers or one of the grant managers or someone who actually has skin in the game to make sure that this actually works, they have to also look at it. But it also abstracts away, they don't have to see all of this stuff. They just see this one thing and they look at it and they're like, okay, here are the results, here is the compiled reports, yeah, this looks good to me, let's approve it. So it does allow us to start to formalize our release process, right? Because right now the release process, especially for like the Pacta Docker image, is one of the biggest things in my head that could benefit. All of the Pacta repos collectively could benefit from this, so that we could look at this and say, okay, here is, this thing, we know this thing on its own works awesome. Before we make another change to it, we need to get other people beyond just the technical team involved to make sure that the results are correct.
So, if you, hypothetically, I like this idea that you have like some restricted branch that has like higher, requirements for something to get merged into there. So for like a release branch, and that makes a lot of sense. Like the people most, in charge or like responsible for like what goes on the web or what goes in the Docker image would have to review that. But that also presents a problem, I think, for me at least. I often like to review really small pull requests, and the bigger it gets, the more panicked I get about it. And the more like context you add to it, the more crazy it gets. So I would actually much prefer to review very small individual features that are added rather than wait till like a release occurs and then be like, oh, we've added these 14 features and here's this this like diff file that's like massive with all these different changes, totally different context of something. So do we get around that by not using squash and merge on this, or do we like how do you manage the diff file so that when you get to this release review, it's not like a massive thing that you can't possibly wrap your head around?
Okay. These two are code reviews. This is not a code review. It's not reasonable to inspect the code that is about to be merged from develop to main. Because, as you said, it probably touches 200 different files and it's 4,000 lines or whatever. That is okay. You shouldn't be inspecting the code here because the code has already been inspected here. What this one is looking at the outputs, making sure that the system as a whole is doing what you're expecting. Does that like, it's a subtle frame shift, but does that make sense of why that makes this whole process possible?
It makes total sense to me because obviously I asked questions, so I understand why that's critical. So you'd be reviewing like, should these features be included in this release or not? I still think that this might be a little bit difficult to do, and might be, at least in our case, like a huge Hail Mary to say like, oh yeah, this has been reviewed already. But I'll say like I'm a little skeptical because I haven't seen this in practice yet, but hypothetically it makes sense to me why it would be like that.
I definitely hear that. This is not a cure-all to all of our problems. This is a slightly better step, right? There's going to be difficulties. All the difficulties that we still have will still exist. Hopefully some of them will exist less, right? Bugs still make it in, we still get merge conflicts, those things still happen. But when you use this system, it becomes less of an issue. And more importantly, even if you ignore all of those things that are less of an issue, you still have a working product.
So what happens if you add some new features, you go through the feature branch, they get reviewed, run through CI, and make it into the develop branch, and then it gets put into the release branch, and somebody reviews and said, yes, this should be in blah, 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 and then it's merged in main. Then you're like, woo, you celebrate because you just had your new release, and then you get back to work, you start opening up new feature branches. Some of them, really quickly get merged back into develop. Some of them still being working, etc. But you're starting changing things on the develop branch. And then a user emails you and says, there's a bug in this, blah, blah, blah. How do you start developing a bug? I mean, I understand that in many cases it wouldn't matter, but I can imagine a case where it might matter that the new features you started adding after that release has been done is already. Yeah. Okay. I've already answered it.
So we're at like this point in time here, right? Something has already been merged back into develop, right? But we have a bug. So there's two paths that we go down here. One, it's a normal bug, and we're just going to deal with it as part of the normal release process. It gets picked up in 2 weeks or a month, whenever the next release cycle is going to be, right? That's the easy one. Right? This could be feature / fix bug, and that's totally fine. The fun one is when it's someone emails us about a bug and no, this really does need to get fixed today. So what you do then is you make a branch off of main. It's one of the very few times that you make a branch off of main. Let's make this one orange. And you basically, you don't worry about develop at all. And you're just saying, I am only worrying about fixing main today. And so you've made your fixes, whatever, right? This thing is going to be orange.
Sorry, heads
Cool.
up that
So
it's about time to end. Yeah?
Okay, I'll just finish this thought. This is like your emergency bug fix branch. Awesome, cool. Bug is fixed, it's back into production, production works. And then at that point, you can merge this thing back into develop and deal with the consequences of whatever it is you had to do in order to make that work.
Cool, that makes sense.
So yes, there is a plan to deal with that. That is hopefully an uncommon situation. Hopefully most of the bugs can just get resolved through normal release process. And also, when you have this, you can start to have a normal release process where you can tell people, oh yeah, we're gonna pick up these things, it'll get picked up in the next release that's happening at the beginning of July or something like that. So.
Yeah, so much more struggle. That was great. I'm super excited about seeing this implemented. Of course, I'm as someone who has learned to teach the Git tool, I would be very happy to be supporting the implementation of this with questions about, okay, how do I actually do it? I got stuck with this merge conflict or whatever. So yeah, that's what I have to say. I'll leave it to you, Alex, to finish the meetup because it's about time.
Yep, that's pretty much all I had to say. I'm sure that this will have more discussions, especially as people start to watch the recording. So I will talk to you all later. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.